Generals don't have kids like you. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore's voice sliced through the fourth-grade classroom so sharply that even the air seemed to freeze. 23 students went silent at once. Pencils stopped moving. Chairs creaked softly as children turned to stare at the back row where 10-year-old Lucas Hughes sat gripping his worksheet with trembling fingers. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Jefferson Elementary, lighting up the little American flags taped to the walls and the college banners hanging above the whiteboard. But somehow the room suddenly felt cold. Lucas slowly stood up beside his desk, his worn sneakers planted against the faded classroom carpet. His cheeks burned as every eye locked onto him. Mrs. Whitmore held his paper high between two fingers like it was something dirty. "A four-star general?" she repeated loudly, laughing once under her breath. "Your father is supposedly a four-star general in the United States Army?" A few students near the front snickered immediately. Tyler Bennett leaned back in his chair with a grin already spreading across his face. Lucas swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore tilted her head, fake sympathy dripping from her expression. "Lucas, honey, lying for attention is not something to be proud of." More laughter scattered across the classroom now, louder this time. Lucas felt his stomach twist into knots. His assignment had only been 3 paragraphs long. Write about your parents' careers. That was all. Other kids had written about lawyers, business owners, politicians, and engineers. Tyler Bennett spent nearly 5 minutes bragging about his father meeting senators in Washington. Mrs. Whitmore smiled the entire time. But when she reached Lucas's paper, her whole face changed. "Do you honestly expect this class to believe that a 4-star general lives in a tiny apartment complex off Madison Avenue?" she asked. "Do you think we're all stupid?" Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could already hear whispers spreading around the room. He made it up. "No way his dad's a general. My dad said generals are rich." Mrs. Whitmore stepped closer to his desk. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor. "Children from military families usually attend private academies or specialized schools," she continued. "They certainly don't show up wearing thrift store sneakers and carrying backpacks held together with duct tape." A boy near the windows laughed so hard milk came out of his nose. The classroom erupted again. Lucas stared down at the floor, his chest tightening painfully. He wanted to disappear. Mrs. Whitmore shook the paper dramatically in the air. "This is exactly what happens when children think they can invent fantasy stories instead of telling the truth." Then she ripped the assignment straight down the middle. The sound tore through the classroom like lightning. Gasps filled the air. Lucas flinched instinctively as the pieces fluttered to the floor beside his shoes. But Mrs. Whitmore wasn't finished. She ripped the paper again. And again. Tiny scraps drifted across the tile like falling snow. "Maybe next time," she said coldly, "you'll remember that honesty matters more than pretending to be something you're not." Lucas's eyes burned, but he refused to cry. His father always told him something during hard moments. Real strength stays calm. Even now, those words echoed in his head while the classroom buzzed around him. Mrs. Whitmore dropped the torn paper into the trash can beside her desk and crossed her arms proudly, certain she had just taught an important lesson. But what nobody in room 214 realized yet was that less than 30 minutes from now, the entire school would fall completely silent. The laughter did not stop when Lucas sat back down. If anything, it spread faster. Tyler Bennett twisted around in his chair with a grin stretched across his face. "Hey, Lucas," he whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Does your dad fly invisible tanks too?" A few kids burst out laughing again. Someone near the windows made fake marching sounds under their breath. Lucas kept his eyes locked on his desk. The scraps of his torn assignment still sat inside the trash can near Mrs. Whitmore's desk, pieces of his handwriting sticking out between crumpled worksheets and empty tissue wrappers. Mrs. Whitmore returned to the front whiteboard like nothing had happened. "Class," she announced brightly, "today is about honesty and integrity. Successful people build trust by telling the truth, not by inventing stories to impress others." Her eyes drifted directly toward Lucas for half a second. The message was obvious. Several students turned to look at him again. Sophia Wilson shifted uncomfortably in her seat near the center row. She glanced at Lucas, then quickly looked away. Even she did not know what to say. The classroom suddenly felt too small for him. Too hot. Too loud. Lucas slowly slid his old phone deeper into his hoodie pocket and stared at the math worksheet in front of him without seeing any of the numbers. He could still hear his father's voice from last month after another student called him poor during recess. People will judge what they can see, General Hughes told him calmly while fixing dinner in their apartment kitchen. Character is what they cannot see right away. Lucas remembered nodding back then, but right now none of those words made the humiliation hurt less. Mrs. Whitmore continued teaching as if she had just delivered some heroic life lesson instead of crushing a 10-year-old boy in front of his classmates. Now, she said while writing fractions across the whiteboard, I hope we can move forward without any more distractions this morning. Tyler raised his hand immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, if somebody lies on an assignment, do they fail automatically? The classroom buzzed with quiet laughter again. Mrs. Whitmore pressed her lips together like she was trying not to smile. That depends on the situation, Tyler. Sometimes consequences are educational. Lucas heard somebody behind him whisper, General Lucas reporting for duty. Another kid snorted, trying not to laugh. His chest tightened harder with every second. He wished the floor would open beneath his desk and swallow him whole. Then his phone buzzed softly inside his hoodie pocket. Lucas froze. He carefully pulled it out beneath the desk where nobody could see. One new message glowed on the cracked screen. Landing early. See you soon, soldier. Dad. Lucas stared at the words. For a moment, his breathing slowed just slightly. He read the text again, then a third time. A tiny smile almost reached his face before Mrs. Whitmore's sharp voice cut across the room again. Lucas. His head snapped up instantly. Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms. Would you like to share whatever is so important with the entire class? Every student looked at him again. Lucas quickly locked his phone and shook his head. No, ma'am. Mrs. Whitmore gave a dramatic sigh. Good. Because we have real work to focus on today. The room settled back into uneasy silence, but something had already shifted inside Lucas. He still felt embarrassed, still humiliated, still small beneath the weight of 30 watching eyes. But hidden inside his pocket now was a message nobody else in that classroom understood. And less than 20 minutes away from Jefferson Elementary, 3 black SUVs were already moving steadily through Arlington traffic toward the school. By 10:15 that morning, the entire classroom had turned against Lucas without even realizing it. It started with whispers, then side glances, then little jokes muttered just loud enough for him to hear. Every time Mrs. Whitmore called on another student, Lucas could feel eyes drifting back toward him like he had become some kind of exhibit sitting in the back corner of room 214. Tyler Bennett leaned across the aisle again during silent reading time. Hey, Lucas, he whispered with a smirk. Does your dad know the president too? 2 boys beside him laughed immediately. Lucas pretended not to hear. He kept his eyes on the open library book sitting on his desk, though he had not turned a single page in almost 10 minutes. The words blurred together anyway. Across the room, Mrs. Whitmore sat at her desk grading assignments with a satisfied expression on her face. Every now and then she glanced up at Lucas like she was monitoring a problem student. The classroom clock ticked louder and louder in his ears. Career day was supposed to begin at 10:30. Parents were already arriving downstairs in the main lobby. Lucas knew because the office intercom had announced it 5 minutes earlier. Some kids bounced excitedly in their seats, waiting for their families. Tyler's father was apparently bringing signed photographs from Capitol Hill. Another girl said her mother was bringing cupcakes from her bakery. Lucas stayed quiet. He had not told anyone his father was coming anymore. Not after what happened. Mrs. Whitmore suddenly stood from her chair and clapped her hands once. All right, class, she announced. Before our guests arrive, I think this is the perfect opportunity to discuss something very important. The room straightened immediately. Lucas felt his stomach sink again. Mrs. Whitmore slowly walked toward the front whiteboard with her hands folded neatly. Character, she said calmly. Character is built on honesty. Once trust is broken, people stop believing you. And sometimes, she paused dramatically while glancing directly at Lucas. People invent stories because they are embarrassed by where they come from. The classroom went silent. Nobody missed who she was talking about. Sophia Wilson shifted uncomfortably in her chair again. Even Deshaun Williams looked down at his desk. Lucas could feel heat crawling up his neck. Mrs. Whitmore continued pacing slowly. There is no shame in being ordinary, she said. No shame in having parents who work regular jobs. But pretending to be connected to power or importance, that only leads to disappointment. Tyler raised his hand with an eager grin. My dad says people lie when they want attention. Mrs. Whitmore smiled warmly. Your father sounds very wise, Tyler. More laughter rippled softly through the room. Lucas clenched his hands beneath the desk hard enough for his knuckles to ache. His father always told him never to lose control in public, especially when people wanted a reaction from him. So he stayed silent. But inside, humiliation twisted tighter every second. Then something strange happened outside the classroom windows. A low murmur spread through the hallway. Mrs. Whitmore paused mid-sentence. Several students near the windows turned their heads toward the parking lot. Sophia blinked. What is that? She whispered softly. Lucas looked up instinctively. 3 large black SUVs had just rolled slowly into the front entrance. Circle of Jefferson Elementary. Their tinted windows reflected the morning sunlight. 2 school secretaries standing near the front doors suddenly straightened nervously. Even from the second-floor classroom, the tension downstairs felt different somehow. Tyler frowned. Who drives cars like that to an elementary school? Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms confidently. Probably district officials, she said dismissively. Now class, where were we? But Lucas had already felt his phone buzz quietly inside his hoodie pocket again. And this time, when he looked down at the screen beneath his desk, his heart nearly stopped. On my way upstairs, soldier. Lucas stared at the text message so long that the words almost stopped feeling real. On my way upstairs, soldier. His fingers tightened around the phone beneath the desk. For the first time all morning, the knot in his chest loosened just a little. Across the classroom, students were still whispering about the SUVs outside. Tyler Bennett leaned halfway out of his chair, trying to see through the window better. Maybe it is Secret Service, he whispered excitedly. Or the governor. Mrs. Whitmore adjusted the pearl necklace around her collar and straightened confidently. Everyone settle down, she said sharply. Important guests visit schools all the time. That does not mean we stop behaving properly. But even she looked distracted now. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway door. The entire energy inside room 214 had changed. A strange tension crept through the air like static before a thunderstorm. Then the classroom intercom crackled alive. Mrs. Whitmore? It was Principal Hayes. His voice sounded tighter than usual. Please prepare your class for career day visitors. We may have additional guests arriving shortly. Mrs. Whitmore blinked once. Additional guests? The line disconnected before she could ask anything else. A few students exchanged excited looks immediately. Tyler grinned. I bet somebody famous is here. Mrs. Whitmore forced a calm smile. Whatever is happening downstairs is none of our concern. Now, everyone open your social studies packets. But nobody was paying attention anymore. Footsteps echoed faintly through the hallway outside. Adult voices. Quick movement. Lucas noticed Sophia Wilson glanced nervously toward the door. Even Deshawn sat straighter in his seat. Something big was clearly happening. Mrs. Whitmore walked back toward her desk pretending everything was under control, but Lucas noticed the tiny crack forming in her confidence now. She picked up her coffee cup too quickly and nearly spilled it. Then another sound rolled through the hallway. Deep voices. Measured footsteps. Heavy enough that students near the door immediately looked up. Tyler whispered, Yo, somebody important is definitely here. Lucas lowered his eyes toward the desk, trying to stay calm, but his heartbeat was pounding so loudly now he could barely hear the room anymore. His father always had that effect on people, even before they saw him, especially when he wore the uniform. Mrs. Whitmore suddenly cleared her throat loudly. Class, she announced, forcing authority back into her voice. Before our guests arrive, I think Lucas owes everyone an apology. The room instantly froze again. Lucas looked up slowly. Mrs. Whitmore folded her arms. Lying to classmates damages trust, she continued. And since today is about role models and leadership, I believe accountability matters. Tyler smirked immediately. Several students turned fully toward Lucas again. The humiliation returned all at once, crashing back over him harder than before. Mrs. Whitmore pointed toward the front of the room. Stand up, Lucas. His stomach dropped. Slowly, Lucas rose from his chair again while 30 eyes locked onto him. Now, Mrs. Whitmore said, tell the class the truth. Silence swallowed the room. Lucas opened his mouth, but before he could speak, voices suddenly erupted in the hallway outside. Fast footsteps. A secretary rushing past. Then the sound of Principal Hayes himself speaking nervously. This way, sir. Right through here. Mrs. Whitmore frowned toward the door. The classroom held its breath. And then came the sound that changed everything. A slow, steady series of footsteps approaching room 214 with absolute confidence. The footsteps stopped directly outside room 214. Every student stared at the classroom door like the entire building had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Principal Hayes appeared first, moving into the doorway with a nervous expression Lucas had never seen before. His tie looked crooked. Tiny beads of sweat clung near his forehead even though the hallway was air-conditioned. Behind him stood two Army officers in formal dress uniforms, their polished metals catching the fluorescent lights overhead. Gasps spread instantly across the classroom. Tyler Bennett's mouth actually fell open. Mrs. Whitmore blinked several times, caught completely off guard now. "Principal Hayes?" she asked carefully, forcing a smile back onto her face. "We are in the middle of class right now." But Principal Hayes barely looked at her. His attention shifted nervously toward the hallway behind him instead. Then the room changed. The entire atmosphere inside the classroom shifted the second he stepped through the doorway. General Vincent Hughes moved with calm authority that seemed to silence everything around him automatically. His dark green uniform was perfectly pressed, for silver stars rested across his shoulders. Rows of ribbons and medals covered his chest. The heavy shine of polished black shoes echoed softly against the classroom floor as he entered. Every child in room 214 stared at him in complete silence. Even Tyler stopped smirking. Lucas felt his throat tighten instantly. No matter how many times he saw his father in uniform, the sight still felt powerful. General Hughes scanned the room once, calm and unreadable, before his eyes landed on Lucas standing beside his desk. The expression on his face softened immediately. "Son," he said quietly. One simple word. But it hit the classroom harder than thunder. Several students physically turned toward Lucas in shock. Sophia Wilson covered her mouth with both hands. Deshawn's eyes went wide. Tyler Bennett looked like all the oxygen had disappeared from the room. Mrs. Whitmore froze completely beside the whiteboard. Her face lost color so fast, it almost looked unreal. Lucas could still feel everyone staring at him, but suddenly it felt different now. The whispers were gone. The laughter was gone. The humiliation that crushed him all morning shattered in an instant beneath the weight of one truth nobody expected. General Hughes stepped farther into the room, his posture calm and composed. "I apologize for arriving later than expected," he said politely to the class. His deep voice carried effortless authority. "My flight from South Korea landed ahead of schedule." Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Principal Hayes stood stiffly near the door, looking completely terrified. Mrs. Whitmore finally forced herself to speak. "General Hughes." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. General Hughes turned toward her calmly. "That is correct." Mrs. Whitmore swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked toward Lucas, then back toward the 4 silver stars on the general's shoulders like her brain could not process both things at the same time. I did not realize," she stammered. General Hughes glanced briefly toward the trash can beside her desk. Tiny pieces of Lucas's torn assignment still sat visible near the top. His eyes lingered there for one long second. The classroom became painfully quiet again. Lucas saw Principal Hayes notice the shredded paper too. The principal's expression immediately changed from nervous to horrified. Mrs. Whitmore noticed it a second later and quickly stepped in front of the trash can like she could somehow hide what she had done. But it was too late. General Hughes looked back at Lucas with calm pride in his eyes. "You doing okay, soldier?" Lucas nodded once, though his voice almost failed him. "Yes, sir." Tyler Bennett slowly sank lower into his chair. Across the room, Sophia looked at Lucas completely differently now, like she was finally seeing him for the first time. And standing beside the whiteboard with 30 students staring at her in silence, Mrs. Patricia Whitmore suddenly realized the little boy she humiliated all morning had been telling the truth the entire time. The silence inside room 214 stretched so long it almost became painful. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. 30 students sat frozen in their chairs while General Vincent Hughes stood calmly near the classroom doorway beside Principal Hayes and 2 Army officers. The same room that mocked Lucas less than 10 minutes earlier now looked like it had forgotten how to breathe. Mrs. Whitmore forced a nervous smile onto her face, though her hands had started trembling slightly at her sides. General Hughes, she said carefully. What an incredible surprise. We are honored to have someone of your service and leadership visit our classroom today. Her voice had changed completely now. Softer, respectful, almost desperate. General Hughes gave a polite nod, but his expression remained unreadable. Thank you, he replied calmly. I understand today is career day. Principal Hayes quickly stepped forward. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Jefferson Elementary is deeply honored by your presence. Lucas had never seen the principal act like this before. The man who usually spoke loudly during assemblies now looked nervous enough to trip over his own shoes. General Hughes slowly walked farther into the classroom. The polished metals across his chest reflected tiny flashes of light onto the classroom walls as students stared at him in complete awe. Tyler Bennett immediately sat straighter in his chair like he suddenly wanted to become invisible. Sophia Wilson could not stop looking between Lucas and the general. The realization was still sinking into the room. Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat softly. Lucas should have mentioned his father was attending today, she said quickly. There seems to have been some misunderstanding earlier this morning. Lucas looked down at the floor again. Misunderstanding. The word almost made his stomach twist. General Hughes turned his head slightly toward the teacher. A misunderstanding, he repeated calmly. Mrs. Whitmore nodded too fast. Children exaggerate sometimes. I was simply trying to encourage honesty in the classroom. Principal Hayes looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. His eyes flicked once toward the shredded assignment still visible inside the trash can. General Hughes noticed the glance immediately. Slowly, he walked toward the desk near the whiteboard. The entire classroom followed his movement in silence. Then, without saying a word, he reached down and picked up one of the torn pieces of paper from the trash can. Mrs. Whitmore visibly stiffened. Lucas held his breath. General Hughes looked at the crumpled fragment carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. The room became so quiet that students could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. General Hughes carefully smoothed the torn paper between his fingers. Interesting, he said softly. Nobody spoke. Mrs. Whitmore's face had turned pale now. Sir, I can explain. No. General Hughes interrupted calmly. He did not raise his voice. Somehow that made it even worse. I believe I understand perfectly. Tyler Bennett stared down at his desk, so hard it looked like he might never look up again. Sophia Wilson slowly covered her mouth again with both hands. Principal Hayes rubbed sweat from his forehead with a shaking handkerchief. General Hughes turned toward the students instead of the teacher. Do any of you know what leadership actually means? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. The entire classroom sat frozen beneath the weight of his presence. General Hughes glanced briefly toward Lucas before continuing. Leadership is not about embarrassing people who look different from you. It is not about mocking someone because their shoes are worn or because they live in a smaller apartment than you expected. Several students slowly lowered their eyes. Mrs. Whitmore looked like she could barely stand upright anymore. And standing quietly beside his desk while the entire classroom shifted around him, Lucas finally realized something important. His father had not walked into room 214 angry. He walked in disappointed. And somehow that felt far more powerful. The disappointment in General Hughes's eyes spread through room 214 heavier than anger ever could have. Even the students felt it. Tyler Bennett stared at his folded hands. Sophia Wilson looked seconds away from crying. Deshawn sat completely still beside the windows, watching everything unfold like he was witnessing something far bigger than a normal school day. General Hughes carefully folded the torn piece of Lucas's assignment and placed it on the teacher's desk. My son was raised to respect authority, he said calmly. That includes teachers. Mrs. Whitmore nodded rapidly. Of course, General Hughes. Lucas has been very respectful. Her voice trembled now despite her effort to stay composed. General Hughes looked directly at her for the first time since entering the classroom. Respect should never require humiliation in return. The words landed like bricks. Principal Hayes immediately stepped forward again. Sir, please understand, Jefferson Elementary does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Mrs. Whitmore has been with the district for over 20 years, and I am certain this situation was simply handled poorly. Simply handled poorly. Lucas noticed several students glance toward the trash can again. Even children understood that tearing up someone's assignment in front of an entire classroom was more than a misunderstanding. General Hughes remained calm. That calmness somehow made everyone even more uncomfortable. "Do you know why I wear this uniform?" he asked quietly, turning toward the students instead of the adults. Nobody answered. "I wear it because this country is supposed to stand for dignity," he continued. "For fairness. For the belief that every child deserves respect before judgment." The room stayed completely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's face tightened slightly. "General Hughes, I assure you I never intended." "Intention matters less than impact," he interrupted softly. Again, he never raised his voice. But every word cut clean through the room. Lucas looked at his father with quiet amazement. At home, General Hughes rarely talked about rank or authority. He spent most evenings helping Lucas with homework at their tiny kitchen table or cooking pancakes on Saturday mornings while old jazz music played softly from a speaker near the sink. But here inside room 214, surrounded by uniforms and medals and terrified adults, his father seemed larger somehow. Not louder, just impossible to ignore. Then the classroom door opened again. A woman in a navy business suit stepped nervously inside carrying a clipboard. District Superintendent Elaine Porter. Mrs. Whitmore's face lost even more color the second she appeared. "Superintendent Porter," Principal Hayes said quickly, clearly caught off guard. "I came as soon as I heard." The superintendent replied quietly. Her eyes immediately moved from General Hughes to the torn paper on the desk, then to Lucas. The room somehow became even tenser. Tyler whispered under his breath, "Oh man." Mrs. Whitmore looked like she might collapse. Superintendent Porter approached slowly. "General Hughes," she said respectfully, extending her hand. "I want to personally apologize for what your son experienced this morning." Lucas noticed the exact moment the classroom realized how serious this had become. This was no longer just about a teacher embarrassing a student. District officials were involved now. Adults with power were suddenly nervous. General Hughes shook the superintendent's hand politely. "I appreciate that," he replied. "But my concern is larger than my son." Mrs. Whitmore blinked rapidly. Superintendent Porter frowned slightly. "Sir." General Hughes turned toward the classroom again. "Every child in this room just learned something today," he said quietly. "The question is whether they learned fear or fairness." Nobody moved. Nobody even shifted in their seats now. The silence inside room 214 had become absolute. And standing near the back row while every adult in the building suddenly scrambled around him, Lucas realized the story was no longer only about him anymore. Superintendent Porter slowly turned toward Mrs. Whitmore with an expression that no longer looked supportive. It looked concerned, deeply concerned. The teacher noticed it immediately. "Elaine," she said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "This situation is being taken out of context. I was simply trying to teach accountability." Nobody responded. Not the superintendent. Not Principal Hayes. Not even the students anymore. The room had completely shifted away from her. Mrs. Whitmore looked around like she was suddenly realizing she no longer controlled the classroom. General Hughes remained calm beside the front row desks, one hand resting lightly on the back of an empty chair. "Accountability without compassion becomes humiliation," he said quietly. "And humiliation leaves scars children remember for years." Lucas felt those words hit him directly in the chest. Across the room, Sophia Wilson slowly wiped tears from beneath her eyes before anyone noticed. Even Tyler Bennett looked uncomfortable now. The confidence he carried all morning had disappeared completely. Superintendent Porter crossed her arms carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked slowly, "did you publicly accuse this student of lying?" Mrs. Whitmore hesitated just long enough to answer the question without actually answering it. "I questioned the credibility of the assignment because the claim seemed unrealistic based on the information available." Principal Hayes closed his eyes briefly like he already knew that answer was disastrous. General Hughes glanced toward Lucas again before speaking. "You looked at my son's clothes," he said softly. "You looked at his skin color. You looked at where he lives. Then you decided what kind of child he was allowed to be." Mrs. Whitmore's mouth opened, but no words came out this time. The classroom sat frozen in absolute silence. Every student understood exactly what he meant. Tyler slowly looked down at his expensive sneakers. Deshawn stared at the floor. Sophia looked directly at Lucas with guilt written all over her face. General Hughes continued calmly. "I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Baltimore," he said. "My mother worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria. We could not afford new clothes every year. Some people looked at me the exact same way your teacher looked at Lucas this morning. Superintendent Porter's expression darkened further with every sentence. But one teacher believed in me anyway, General Hughes said. One teacher decided my future mattered more than my circumstances. Mrs. Whitmore visibly swallowed hard. Her hands shook slightly near her desk now. General Hughes finally looked directly at her again. Children remember the adults who make them feel small, he said quietly. Especially when those adults stand at the front of a classroom. Nobody moved. Even the two Army officers near the doorway remained completely still. Principal Hayes looked like he wanted to disappear from existence entirely. Then the superintendent spoke again. Mrs. Whitmore, she said firmly, please step into the hallway with me for a moment. The teacher blinked rapidly. Right now? Right now? Mrs. Whitmore looked around the classroom one last time, searching for support that no longer existed. But nobody came to her defense. Not even Principal Hayes. Slowly, she gathered herself and walked toward the doorway on trembling legs. The moment she stepped into the hallway with Superintendent Porter, whispers instantly exploded across the classroom. Oh my God, she is in so much trouble. Lucas was telling the truth the whole time. Tyler Bennett stayed silent. He could not even look at Lucas anymore. General Hughes calmly walked over to his son's desk and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Lucas looked up at him quietly. You okay? The general asked softly. Lucas nodded once. Yes, sir. But outside in the hallway, raised voices had already started echoing through Jefferson Elementary. The whispers inside room 214 grew louder the second Mrs. Whitmore disappeared into the hallway with Superintendent Porter. Students leaned toward one another, eyes wide, voices low and nervous. She is definitely getting fired. I cannot believe Lucas's dad is actually a four-star general. Did you see all those medals? Tyler Bennett stayed completely silent now. His face had gone pale sometime during the last few minutes, and he kept avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. Lucas sat quietly at his desk, while General Hughes remained beside him with one steady hand resting on his shoulder. For the first time all morning, Lucas no longer felt small inside the classroom. Principal Hayes quickly clapped his hands together, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. All right, everyone, he said nervously, forcing a smile that did not look natural at all. Let us settle down. Nobody really listened. The entire room was still buzzing with shock. One of the Army officers near the doorway stepped slightly aside as more parents gathered curiously in the hallway outside. Word was spreading through Jefferson Elementary at lightning speed now. Teachers from nearby classrooms pretended to walk past the door while clearly trying to peek inside. Lucas even spotted the school librarian standing near the water fountain whispering to another teacher. General Hughes finally removed his hand from Lucas's shoulder and stepped toward the front of the classroom again. The room immediately quieted down. I did not come here to embarrass anyone, he said calmly. Especially not in front of children. Principal Hayes nodded rapidly. Of course, sir. Absolutely. General Hughes glanced around the classroom slowly. But moments like this matter, he continued. Because children learn how to treat people by watching adults. Several students lowered their heads again. Sophia Wilson looked visibly emotional now. Tyler finally raised his hand halfway like he was afraid to speak. General Hughes looked toward him calmly. Yes. Tyler swallowed hard. Sir, I laughed at Lucas earlier. The room went silent again. Tyler's voice shook with embarrassment. I thought he was lying too. Lucas looked up, surprised. Tyler stared down at his own desk while speaking. I should not have done that. General Hughes studied him quietly for a second before nodding once. Admitting when you are wrong takes courage, he said. Tyler looked both relieved and ashamed at the same time. Across the room, Sophia slowly raised her hand too. I did not say anything, she whispered softly. But I knew it was mean. General Hughes gave her the same calm nod. Silence can hurt people too. Those words hit the classroom almost harder than anything else he had said. Lucas noticed several students suddenly avoiding eye contact with each other. Because deep down, all of them knew they had watched him get humiliated without helping. Then the hallway outside suddenly went quiet. Completely quiet. The kind of silence that spreads when something serious has just happened. Principal Hayes looked nervously toward the doorway. A few seconds later, Superintendent Porter stepped back into the classroom alone. Mrs. Whitmore was not with her. Every student immediately noticed. The superintendent closed the classroom door carefully behind her and folded her hands together. Her expression was controlled, but heavy. Mrs. Whitmore will not be returning to class today, she said firmly. A wave of stunned silence rolled across the room. Tyler's eyes widened. Sophia covered her mouth again. Even Principal Hayes looked shaken despite clearly expecting bad news. Superintendent Porter looked directly at the students now. Every child in this school deserves dignity, she continued. No matter where they live, what they look like, or what assumptions adults choose to make about them. Lucas slowly looked down at his desk again. The humiliation from this morning still hurt. But for the first time since entering room 214, something else finally felt stronger than the pain. Validation. And standing near the whiteboard while district officials, army officers, and an entire classroom sat in silence around him, General Vincent Hughes quietly realized his son had just taught everyone in that room a lesson far bigger than career day. The atmosphere inside room 214 felt completely different now. Earlier that morning, the classroom had been filled with laughter aimed at Lucas Hughes. Now every student sat stiff and quiet while Superintendent Porter stood near the front whiteboard beside Principal Hayes and General Vincent Hughes. Nobody wanted to say the wrong thing anymore. Outside the classroom windows, more parents had gathered in the hallway trying to understand why Army officers and district officials were standing inside an elementary school classroom. The entire building seemed frozen around what had happened. Superintendent Porter slowly walked toward Lucas's desk. Her voice softened when she spoke. "Lucas," she said carefully, "I owe you an apology on behalf of this school district." 30 students watched in complete silence. Lucas looked up slowly, unsure what to say. The superintendent continued. "No child should ever feel humiliated for telling the truth." Lucas nodded quietly. His throat still felt tight from everything that happened that morning. Superintendent Porter glanced toward the trash can again where pieces of the torn assignment still remained visible, especially not publicly. General Hughes remained calm beside the front row desks, but Lucas noticed the way his father's jaw tightened slightly every time someone looked at those shredded papers. Principal Hayes suddenly stepped forward. "Lucas has always been a wonderful student," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "Polite, respectful, hardworking. We value him very much at Jefferson Elementary." Several students exchanged awkward glances. The timing of that statement felt painfully obvious. General Hughes looked at the principal evenly. "Did you value him this morning?" Principal Hayes immediately fell silent. The question hung in the room like a weight nobody could escape. Tyler Bennett slowly looked down again. Sophia Wilson stared at Lucas with guilt still written across her face. Even some of the students who laughed earlier now looked ashamed of themselves. General Hughes turned toward the children again. "People often reveal who they truly are when they believe someone has no power," he said calmly. "That is when character matters most." The classroom remained absolutely still. Lucas could feel every student listening carefully now in a way they never listened to Mrs. Whitmore all morning. One of the Army officers near the doorway quietly checked his watch before stepping closer to the general. "Sir," he said respectfully, "the Pentagon call begins in 40 minutes. Several students' eyes widened again hearing the word Pentagon. Tyler Bennett looked like he had completely forgotten how to blink. General Hughes nodded once. "Thank you, Colonel." Then he looked back toward Lucas. "Before I leave," he said softly, "I want everyone in this room to understand something." He walked slowly toward the center of the classroom, his polished shoes echoing softly across the tile floor. "Success does not always look expensive," he continued. "Leadership does not always arrive in luxury cars. And dignity should never depend on someone's zip code, race, or clothing." Superintendent Porter nodded slowly beside him. Principal Hayes looked deeply uncomfortable. Lucas felt something inside his chest shift hearing those words. Not just relief. Pride. Real pride. The kind he had been too embarrassed to feel. Earlier that morning. Then Sophia Wilson slowly raised her hand again. Her voice trembled slightly. "Lucas," she said quietly, "I am really sorry." The room turned toward her. She looked genuinely emotional now. "I should have said something earlier." Lucas blinked in surprise. Before he could answer, another voice spoke up. Then another. "Me too. Sorry, Lucas. I should not have laughed." Tyler Bennett swallowed hard before finally speaking without looking up. "I was wrong." The apologies spread across room 214 one after another until the entire classroom felt completely different from the one Lucas walked into that morning. General Hughes watched silently for a moment before finally placing one hand gently on his son's shoulder again. "That," he said quietly, "is how real leadership begins." And standing there surrounded by classmates who no longer looked at him with mockery but respect, Lucas Hughes realized something he would remember for the rest of his life. The people who laughed at you first are often the same people who fall silent once the truth walks into the room. For the next several minutes, nobody inside room 214 acted the same way they had earlier that morning. The classroom that once felt hostile now felt uncertain, quiet, almost ashamed of itself. Students who laughed at Lucas before could barely look at him directly anymore. Even the hallway outside had gone silent as teachers and parents slowly realized the situation inside the classroom was far more serious than simple school gossip. Superintendent Porter stood near the whiteboard speaking quietly with Principal Hayes while the two Army officers waited near the doorway. General Hughes remained calm beside Lucas's desk, but his presence still filled the entire room without effort. Tyler Bennett finally gathered enough courage to turn slightly toward Lucas. "Your dad really works at the Pentagon?" he asked quietly. Lucas nodded once. Tyler looked stunned all over again. "That is insane." Deshawn leaned closer from the next row. "Bro, why did you never tell us?" Lucas shrugged softly. "My dad does not like showing off." General Hughes heard that and allowed the smallest smile to touch his face. "There is a difference between confidence and arrogance," he said calmly. "Too many people confuse the two." Several students listened carefully, like every word mattered now. Sophia Wilson slowly raised her hand again. "General Hughes?" "Yes." "Were you scared when you first joined the Army?" The room became attentive immediately. Even Superintendent Porter paused her conversation to listen. General Hughes folded his hands calmly behind his back. "Every person feels fear," he answered. "Courage is deciding your values matter more than your fear." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. Tyler stared at the medals across the general's chest with open admiration, now instead of skepticism. The entire emotional balance of the room had flipped completely. Earlier that morning, Lucas had been the kid everyone mocked. Now students looked at him like he carried something special they had failed to recognize. Principal Hayes suddenly cleared his throat nervously. "General Hughes," he said carefully, "the district would like to formally invite you to speak at our Veterans Day assembly this year." Superintendent Porter immediately nodded. "We would be honored." Lucas noticed how quickly the adults were trying to repair the situation now. General Hughes remained polite but measured. "I appreciate the invitation," he replied. "But before schools focus on ceremonies, they should focus on culture." The superintendent's expression tightened slightly. General Hughes continued calmly. "Children should not need a powerful parent standing behind them to receive basic respect." The room fell silent again. Those words hit harder than anything else he had said all morning. Lucas saw Superintendent Porter slowly lower her eyes. Because deep down, every adult in that room knew he was right. If General Hughes had never walked through that door, the humiliation would have continued. Lucas would have gone home carrying that pain alone. Tyler suddenly looked sick, realizing the same thing. "That is messed up," he whispered quietly under his breath. General Hughes turned toward the students again. "You never know who someone truly is," he said. "And more importantly, you never know what battles people are carrying privately." Sophia blinked. "What do you mean?" The general glanced toward Lucas briefly before answering. "This morning my son walked into school excited for career day. Instead, he spent hours being publicly embarrassed for something that was true." Several students visibly cringed hearing it spoken out loud like that. The reality sounded uglier now. Lucas lowered his eyes again, the memory still painful despite everything that happened afterward. General Hughes rested a hand gently on his son's shoulder once more. "The strongest people are not the loudest ones," he said quietly. "Sometimes strength looks like staying calm when people are trying to make you feel invisible." Lucas looked up at his father then. For the first time all day, he no longer felt embarrassed about who he was, where he lived, or what people thought when they saw his old sneakers. And watching the respect in every face around the classroom now, the students of room 214 were finally beginning to understand something too. Power is not always obvious when it first walks into the room. Nearly an hour had passed since General Vincent Hughes first walked into room 214, but nobody in the classroom seemed eager for him to leave. The entire school day had transformed into something none of the students would ever forget. The laughter from earlier felt impossible now, like it belonged to a completely different room, a completely different group of children. Superintendent Porter quietly spoke with one of the Army officers near the doorway, while Principal Hayes nervously answered questions from curious parents gathering in the hallway. Inside the classroom, the students remained unusually quiet, listening carefully every time General Hughes spoke. Lucas sat straighter in his chair now. The shame that crushed him that morning had slowly been replaced with something steadier. Confidence. Not arrogance. Not revenge. Just the quiet confidence of finally being seen clearly. General Hughes glanced at the classroom clock before turning back toward the students. "I need to leave soon," he said calmly. A wave of disappointment visibly moved across the room. Tyler Bennett looked shocked by his own reaction. Earlier that morning, he mocked Lucas without hesitation. Now he looked genuinely sad the general was leaving. Sophia Wilson raised her hand again almost immediately. "General Hughes?" "Yes." "How do you stay calm when people judge you unfairly?" The room became silent again, waiting for his answer. General Hughes smiled slightly, but there was sadness in it too. "Because anger is easy," he said softly. "Character is harder." Several students nodded slowly. Even Superintendent Porter stopped listening to the hallway conversation so she could hear him speak. General Hughes continued. "People may underestimate you because of your race, your neighborhood, your clothes, or your background. That says more about them than it does about you." Lucas looked down at his old sneakers beneath the desk. For the first time all day, he no longer wanted to hide them. General Hughes slowly walked toward the front whiteboard where pieces of Lucas's torn assignment still rested near the trash can. He picked up the largest fragment carefully. Then he turned back toward the students. "This paper mattered to Lucas," he said quietly. "Not because it was about me. Because he was proud." The room stayed completely silent. Sophia wiped her eyes again. Tyler looked deeply ashamed now. General Hughes looked around the classroom one final time. "Never punish someone for being proud of where they come from," he said softly. "Especially when you do not know the full story." Superintendent Porter stepped forward carefully. "General Hughes," she said sincerely, "this district will be reviewing everything that happened today." Principal Hayes nodded immediately beside her. "We are committed to doing better." General Hughes gave a polite nod, though his expression remained measured. "I hope so," he replied calmly, "because the next child might not have someone powerful walking through the door behind them." The words landed heavily across the room. Every adult felt it. Every student too. Lucas noticed Tyler staring at the floor again after hearing that, because they all understood now how different the day could have ended. General Hughes finally turned fully toward his son. "Ready to head home, soldier?" Lucas smiled softly for the first time all morning. "Yes, sir." The general placed a steady hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the classroom door. As they passed through the rows of desks, something unexpected happened. One by one, students began standing up. First Sophia, then Deshawn, then Tyler. Within seconds, the entire classroom was on its feet in complete silence. Not because a teacher told them to stand, not because they were afraid, but because respect had finally replaced judgment. Lucas paused near the doorway, surprised by the sight. General Hughes glanced back once at the class. "Remember this feeling," he said quietly. "Respect should never depend on discovering someone powerful. Every person deserves it from the beginning." And as Lucas Hughes walked beside his father through the silent hallway of Jefferson Elementary, the students of room 214 understood they had just witnessed something far bigger than career day. The hallway outside room 214 remained completely silent as Lucas Hughes walked beside his father toward the front entrance of Jefferson Elementary. Students from other classrooms peeked through cracked doors, while teachers stood frozen near bulletin boards pretending not to stare. The entire school had heard what happened by now, but nobody whispered when Lucas passed anymore. Nobody laughed. Nobody smirked at his old sneakers or worn backpack. They simply watched quietly as the 10-year-old boy who had been humiliated that morning walked through the building with his head held high. General Vincent Hughes moved beside him with the same calm authority he carried everywhere, but now Lucas noticed something else too. Pride. Not pride in rank or medals or military titles. Pride in him. Outside the front office windows, the 3 black SUVs still waited beneath the bright Virginia sunlight, while security personnel stood nearby, speaking softly into radios. Principal Hayes and Superintendent Porter followed several steps behind, still trying to apologize every few moments. General Hughes, Principal Hayes said carefully, "We truly hope this incident does not reflect how your family views our school." General Hughes stopped walking near the front doors and turned toward him calmly. "What happened today reflects one person's choices," he replied. "What matters now is what your school chooses to learn from it." Superintendent Porter nodded immediately. "We will." Lucas noticed the superintendent looked genuinely shaken now, not just embarrassed. Like she understood this morning could have permanently damaged a child if things had gone differently. General Hughes glanced down at his son. "You hungry, soldier?" Lucas smiled slightly. "Yes, sir." "Good. Your mother already made reservations at your favorite burger place." Lucas laughed softly for the first time all day. The sound surprised even him. It felt strange how different the world looked now compared to only a few hours earlier. As they stepped outside into the warm afternoon air, Tyler Bennett suddenly came running through the front doors behind them. "Lucas!" Lucas turned around instinctively. Tyler slowed to a stop, breathing hard. For a second, he looked nervous again, like he almost lost the courage to continue. Then he finally held out the torn pieces of Lucas's assignment, carefully taped back together. "The custodian helped me fix it," Tyler said quietly. Lucas stared at the paper in surprise. The words were crooked and wrinkled now, but readable again. "My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army." Tyler swallowed hard. "I should not have laughed at you." General Hughes remained silent beside his son, letting Lucas answer for himself. Lucas looked down at the repaired paper for a long second before finally nodding once. "Thanks." Tyler looked relieved enough to almost collapse. "See you tomorrow?" he asked carefully. Lucas smiled a little wider now. "Yeah, see you tomorrow." Tyler nodded before heading back toward the school entrance. General Hughes watched him disappear inside before glancing down at Lucas. "People can grow," he said quietly, "if they choose to." Lucas looked back toward Jefferson Elementary one last time. Earlier that morning, the building felt cold and humiliating and cruel. Now it looked different somehow. Not perfect, but different. The general opened the SUV door for his son. Before Lucas climbed inside, he paused for a moment. "Dad." "Yeah, soldier." Lucas hesitated. "Were you really proud of my assignment?" General Hughes smiled softly. "Son, I was never proud because you wrote about me." Lucas blinked. "Then why?" The general rested one hand gently on his shoulder. "Because you told the truth about where you come from without being ashamed of it." Lucas felt his throat tighten again, but this time it was not from humiliation. It was something warmer, something stronger. He climbed into the SUV beside his father while cameras from nearby phones quietly lowered around them. No dramatic speech followed. No revenge. No anger. Just a quiet drive away from Jefferson Elementary with dignity fully restored. And inside room 214, long after the SUVs disappeared from sight, one lesson stayed behind stronger than anything written on a whiteboard that day. Never decide someone's worth before learning their story.